What happens when a successful CEO goes undercover and faces discrimination in his own store? Saturday morning, just after 10 a.m., Terence Hall adjusted the brim of his baseball cap in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at him was barely recognizable, not the CEO who had built a multi-million-dollar retail empire, but just another face in the crowd. His plain hoodie and jeans were a far cry from the tailored suits that normally defined his days. Today wasn't about boardrooms or numbers. It was about stepping into his own world, unannounced, to see what it looked like through a stranger's eyes. Terence had always believed in the power of connection. His company had been built on the promise that every customer mattered, no matter their background. But recently, whispers of complaints had started trickling up the chain, rumors of poor service, bias, and a lack of care from his staff. If there was truth to these claims, he needed to know. Not as the boss, but as someone living it. The retail store in question sat just outside Dallas, Texas, in a busy suburban plaza. It wasn't the flagship location, nor was it the top-performing store in his chain. But this location held significance. It was the first store Terence had opened outside his home state, a gamble that had paid off handsomely. He'd visited countless times in its early days, but now, years later, he couldn't help but wonder. Had the warmth and inclusivity he'd envisioned stayed intact? Terence parked his car and took a deep breath. A rush of anticipation, mixed with unease, settled over him. He was about to walk into the unknown, shedding the safety net of his title to see if his values still held weight at the foundation of his business. The truth, however uncomfortable, was something he owed to himself, and to every person who walked through those doors. But what Terence didn't know was that his commitment to uncovering the truth would lead him to a moment he'd never forget, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his own business. Terence stepped out of his car and into the bustling parking lot. The sun was already high, casting sharp reflections off the windshields of nearby vehicles. He adjusted the strap of his weathered canvas bag, the kind you'd see slung over the shoulder of an everyday shopper. Today, he wasn't CEO Terence Hall. He was just another customer with a name no one needed to know. The storefront gleamed in the sunlight, the logo bold and familiar. He couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as he approached the automatic doors. This was his creation, a vision turned reality. But pride quickly gave way to focus as he crossed the threshold, the cool blast of air conditioning welcoming him inside. The store hummed with activity. Shoppers pushed carts laden with goods, and children's voices rose and fell in excitement near the toy aisle. Employees in uniform moved with purpose, stocking shelves, ringing up purchases, and assisting customers. To the untrained eye, everything seemed to run like clockwork. But Terence wasn't here to glance over the surface. He was here to dig deeper. He paused near a display of brightly colored kitchen appliances, taking in his surroundings. A young woman in a striped uniform jacket stood nearby, chatting with a customer about product features. A stock associate rearranged items on a nearby shelf, his movements efficient but detached. And there, at the far end of the store, stood a younger man, leaning against the counter of the electronics section, idly scrolling on his phone. Terence decided to head in that direction. He wandered through the aisles, deliberately moving at the pace of a casual shopper. He picked up a pair of headphones, turning them over in his hands as though considering a purchase. It was a test, simple yet telling. Would this employee approach him? Offer assistance? A smile? Anything? But nothing came. The young man barely glanced up from his phone, let alone acknowledged his presence. Terence waited, giving the employee every opportunity to engage. Still, nothing. He felt an uncomfortable knot begin to form in his stomach, but he wasn't ready to draw conclusions just yet. Maybe the employee was busy. Maybe he hadn't noticed. Terence moved on, scanning the aisles, observing interactions. He caught sight of an older woman looking for help near the home goods section. She seemed frustrated, glancing around for assistance. Before Terence could step in to see how it unfolded, a second employee approached her, cheerful and attentive. Relief softened her features as they began to chat. It was a stark contrast to what he had just experienced. But as Terence turned back toward the electronics counter, determined to give the young man another chance, what happened next would make it clear that this wasn't just a one-off oversight. It was something much bigger. Terence returned to the electronics counter, this time holding a boxed set of Bluetooth speakers. He placed the box on the counter gently, the kind of action that should naturally catch someone's attention. The young employee finally looked up, his expression blank and uninterested. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear that he wasn't particularly interested in helping. Terence smiled, hoping to diffuse the awkward energy. "Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about these. Are they good for outdoor use?" The employee gave the box a cursory glance before shrugging. "I don't know. Probably," he said, his attention drifting back toward his phone. Terence blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Could you maybe check? I want to be sure before I buy them." The employee sighed heavily, as if Terence's request was a monumental inconvenience. Without a word, he grabbed the box and flipped it over, skimming the back. "It says here they're weatherproof," he mumbled, handing it back without further explanation. Terence felt a wave of frustration rise within him, but he kept his voice calm. "Okay, and do you know if they're compatible with most devices?" The employee rolled his eyes. "Look, man, all the details are right here on the box. You can read it yourself." He motioned vaguely toward the shelf. "Or pick something else. Doesn't matter to me." A heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the distant hum of the store. Terence could feel the tension creeping into his own posture. This wasn't just inattentiveness, it was outright dismissiveness. He glanced around, noticing other customers being treated with warmth and enthusiasm by employees. A white couple near the front was getting personalized assistance from the same young man who had helped the older woman earlier. Yet here he was, barely being acknowledged. Determined to remain composed, Terence decided to test the situation further. "You seem busy," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Is there someone else who might be able to help?" The employee smirked, the corners of his mouth curling with disdain. "I don't think anyone's free right now. Just figure it out, all right?" The words stung more than Terence expected. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was disappointed. This wasn't just a bad attitude. It was something deeper, something uglier. And it wasn't just about him. If this was how the employee treated someone he assumed was an ordinary shopper, how many others had left this store feeling the same sting of indifference? Before he could say another word, the young man turned away, grabbing his phone and walking off toward the back of the store. Terence stood there, rooted in place, holding the box of speakers. For a moment he considered walking out, but he quickly dismissed the thought. He wasn't done yet. But what Terence didn't realize was that this moment of dismissiveness would soon expose something far more troubling about the culture he thought he had built. Terence set the speakers back on the shelf, his mind racing with thoughts. The encounter wasn't just unprofessional, it felt personal. He decided to explore the store further, observing how other employees interacted with customers. If this single experience was an anomaly, he needed to be sure. If it wasn't, he had a bigger problem on his hands. He wandered into the clothing section, where a young Latina employee was folding shirts at a display. She greeted him warmly, her smile genuine. "Let me know if you need help with anything," she said. It was a stark contrast to the cold reception he'd just experienced. Terence lingered, pretending to browse, and noticed her assisting an elderly man nearby. She was patient and attentive, helping him find the right size and even suggesting a matching tie. The man's gratitude was evident, and the interaction left Terence feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe the store wasn't entirely off track. But as he moved toward the home goods section, a conversation stopped him in his tracks. Two employees, both young and casually leaning against a shelf, were engaged in a hushed but unmistakably disrespectful exchange. "That guy over there," one of them said, jerking his head subtly in Terence's direction, "is probably just here to browse. People like him never buy anything big." Terence felt his jaw tighten as he pretended to examine a set of pots and pans. The other employee chuckled. "Yeah, he doesn't look like he's got the cash for this stuff. Probably just wasting time." It was a gut punch. They didn't know who he was. To them, he was just another black man walking around a store they assumed he couldn't afford. The casual nature of their conversation, the ease with which they dismissed him, spoke volumes. It wasn't just one bad employee, it was a culture that had somehow allowed these attitudes to fester. He stayed quiet, resisting the urge to confront them then and there. Instead, he moved toward the checkout area, determined to gather as much insight as he could before addressing the issue. At the register, he found a middle-aged black woman ringing up customers with a kind, professional demeanor. Her name tag read Denise. Terence watched as she greeted each person with a smile, her voice steady and warm. When his turn came, she looked up and smiled. "Did you find everything okay?" "Not exactly," Terence replied, his tone measured. "But I think I'll hold off for now." Denise's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "Well, if you need anything, just let us know. We're here to help." Her sincerity was genuine, and for a moment, it eased the weight on Terence's chest. It was clear that not everyone in this store shared the same dismissive attitude. But it also highlighted the inconsistency. Why were some employees so welcoming, while others were so blatantly biased? But as Terence walked out of the store, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play, and he knew it was time to confront the truth head-on. Terence sat in his car, the afternoon heat pressing against the windows. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring out at the store that bore his company's logo. It felt surreal. This business, his pride and joy, was supposed to represent opportunity, fairness, and respect. Yet the experiences he'd just had painted a different picture. One he wasn't prepared for, but couldn't ignore. The dismissive behavior from the electronics employee lingered in his mind, but it was the casual comments he overheard in the home goods section that cut the deepest. These weren't isolated incidents. They hinted at a deeper issue within his company culture, one that had gone unchecked. He thought back to the early days of the business, when he personally trained every manager and hired staff based on shared values. Back then, he'd emphasized the importance of treating every customer like family, regardless of who they were or how much they spent. But as the company grew, those personal touches became harder to maintain. Delegation was necessary, but had it come at the cost of the values he'd worked so hard to instill? Terence couldn't help but wonder if he'd grown too distant from the day-to-day operations. Success had brought expansion, but it had also created blind spots. Were managers fostering an environment of respect, or were they turning a blind eye to subtle prejudices and unprofessionalism? Had he failed to equip his employees with the tools to combat bias and treat everyone equally? He took a deep breath, his mind replaying the interactions from earlier. Denise, the kind cashier, had been a reminder of what his business should stand for. Yet employees like her were being overshadowed by those who didn't share her values. It wasn't just about the customer experience. It was about the culture he had allowed to take root. Terence reached for his notebook, always kept in the glove compartment, and jotted down his thoughts. This wasn't just about fixing one store. It was about ensuring that every employee in every location understood the responsibility of representing his brand. It was about accountability from the top down. But before he could rebuild, Terence knew there was one more step to take. A step that would reveal just how deep the problem ran and challenge those at the heart of it. Terence walked back into the store with a quiet determination. He wasn't here to create a scene or publicly shame anyone. This wasn't about ego. It was about addressing a culture that had gone astray. He headed toward the customer service desk and asked to speak with the store manager. After a few moments, a man in his late 40s approached. His name tag read Brian, and his demeanor was professional but slightly wary. "How can I help you today?" he asked. Terence extended a hand. "Terence Hall," he said, watching as Brian's eyes widened in recognition. "I'm the owner of this store." The manager's composure faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Mr. Hall, it's an honor to meet you. If I'd known you were visiting..." Terence held up a hand to stop him. "That's the point, Brian. You weren't supposed to know. I came here as a regular customer to see how things are really running. And what I saw today, it wasn't good." Brian's face reddened slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me what happened?" Terence recounted the events of the day, the indifference from the electronics employee, the overheard comments, and the stark differences in how customers were treated. He spoke calmly but firmly, his words carrying the weight of disappointment. "This isn't just about one bad employee," he said. "It's about a culture that allows this kind of behavior to exist. I've built this company on the idea that every customer deserves respect, regardless of who they are. Today, I saw the opposite of that." Brian shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't aware of these issues. I've always tried to ensure our team follows the company's values." Terence nodded. "I believe you, but clearly something is slipping through the cracks. And it's not just your responsibility, it's mine too. Somewhere along the way, I've let the values I built this company on get diluted. That ends today." He asked Brian to gather the staff for an impromptu meeting in the break room. Within minutes, the employees were assembled, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Terence stood before them, no longer just another customer, but the leader they didn't expect to see. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Terence Hall. I'm the founder and CEO of this company. And today, I came here undercover to see how things are running on the ground." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Terence took a moment to look at each face before continuing. "What I saw today was troubling. Some of you showed kindness and professionalism, the kind of attitude this company was built on. But others failed to meet even the most basic standard of respect. And that failure isn't just on you, it's on me for not ensuring our culture stays consistent." He turned toward the young electronics employee, who now looked pale and nervous. "You dismissed me, ignored me, and made it clear I wasn't worth your time. That's unacceptable. But even worse, I overheard 2 employees speaking about me, making assumptions about who I am and what I could afford, based on nothing more than a glance." The tension in the room was palpable, but Terence kept his tone measured. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to fix this. Because if we don't treat every customer with respect, we fail. And I won't let this company fail." But as he stood there, watching their expressions shift from shock to reflection, Terence knew this was only the beginning of the changes he needed to make. Terence paused, letting the room settle into silence. The weight of his words had landed, and now came the part that mattered most: action. He knew that pointing out the problems wasn't enough. He needed to lead the way toward a solution. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued, his voice calm but resolute. "This isn't about punishment or pointing fingers. It's about accountability and growth. Every single one of us, myself included, has a responsibility to uphold the values this company was built on. Starting today, we're making changes." He turned to Brian, the store manager. "First, we're going to implement mandatory training on bias and customer service. Not just here, but across every store. It's not enough to assume people know how to treat others. We need to teach it, reinforce it, and hold people accountable." Brian nodded, his expression a mix of relief and determination. "Understood, Mr. Hall. I'll make sure it happens." Terence addressed the group again. "Second, I'll be visiting more stores in person unannounced. This isn't about catching anyone off guard, it's about staying connected. I need to see firsthand what's happening on the ground." The employees exchanged nervous glances, but there was a sense of understanding in the room. Terence could see that some of them, especially Denise, were nodding subtly in agreement. "Lastly," Terence said, his tone softening, "I want to hear from all of you. What's working? What's not? If there are issues with leadership or policies, I need to know. My door is open, but more importantly, I'll make sure you have a way to voice concerns anonymously if you're not comfortable coming to me directly." The employees seemed to relax slightly, and Terence took that as a sign to close on a heartfelt note. "I started this company because I wanted to create something different, something better. A place where everyone, no matter who they are, felt valued. Somewhere along the way, we lost a little of that, but I'm not giving up on it. I know we can do better, and I'm counting on all of you to help make that happen." As the meeting wrapped up, Terence approached Denise, the cashier who had shown professionalism and kindness. "Thank you for being a bright spot today," he said, offering a genuine smile. "Your attitude reminds me why I started this business." Denise smiled back, her voice steady. "Thank you, Mr. Hall. I just try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated." Walking out of the store for the second time that day, Terence felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. He had been given a wake-up call, and now it was up to him to act on it. But as he drove away, Terence couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that sometimes facing hard truths was the only way to move forward, and that every step toward change started with someone willing to take the first. If this story resonated with you, remember that the smallest actions can create the biggest impacts. Treat people with respect, speak up when you see injustice, and never stop striving for a better, fairer world. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire change.